welcome to the show, Carson Warrener. I really appreciate you dropping by today for this little chat.
Thank you.
Obviously, you know a little bit about the association, about the Tecumseh Park Neighborhood Association, and what we're trying to do, and really it's about bringing light to how we can solve some of the issues that we have surrounding, for our interests, the emergency shelter, but also putting emergency shelters in any residential area. We don't know where this channel is going to go, but we know that we're starting with something that matters to this neighborhood very much and to Chatham. So
that's awesome.
I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
So to start with, I'm going to just. On March 21st, 2022, Council decided to move the temporary emergency homeless shelter to a former elementary school on Murray Street, which you know about. Without consulting residents, they did this. There's no public meetings prior to council decision, no open houses, no surveys, no direct communication with residents at all prior to approving staff recommendations. There was even 23 deputations asking for prior public consultations, and they were all ignored by the majority of council and the mayor.
Wow.
How would you ensure proper prior public consultation takes place?
That's an excellent question. Well, I think it'd be a given that is already the procedure, and that's already the process. So that framework already exists, and that's what's supposed to happen. So that would, I guess, fall into a role of council. So the Municipal Act, Section 224, specifically outlines the role of a council. So there's 7 items, and I can reference the one that would be most important for this, because I think it's important to be precise here.
Thank you.
So to answer your question, how would I ensure proper prior public consultation takes place? As a councillor specifically, one of those roles of council is to ensure the accountability and transparency of the operations of the municipality, including the activities of senior management of the municipality. Prior to that is to ensure the administrative policies, practices, and procedures, and controllership policies, practices, and procedures are in place to implement the decisions of council. So essentially, I would do my job as a councillor to not ask the question about maybe the content in that exact situation, of why the process was circumvented. That's where it would start.
Okay.
And I would demand that answer of other councillors as well.
Okay.
Because if all councillors feel that it's okay to circumvent a process, that actually becomes the problem. Because council is the highest authority over a municipality. So, you know, there's 2 elements there. There's the administration and there's the council.
Right.
So if there's passive acquiescence with the council, that administration is pushing things a certain way or bypassing a procedure, then at that maybe instant, blame would fall on the council.
Right. Okay. So you'll hold people's feet to the fire.
It's a long answer, but yeah, I would force the accountability
using the rules that are already in place.
Absolutely, everything is well defined. We don't need new rules of how to run the show.
It makes sense.
Yeah,
it makes sense. How would you ensure that staff recommendations are more detailed and allow for public consultation and opportunities?
I think that happens ultimately as an ongoing process. So I don't think there's a silver bullet for that. I think through the process of administration bringing, let's say, a report to council, and council engaging with that documentation. So let's say, real simple way. Currently, most items are put on a consent agenda with this whole virtual council we have.
Right.
So they put everything under one big heading, and there's basically one reading and one vote. So a councillor's job then is to say, hey, this is a pretty contentious item, this little report or whatever it may be. I want to pull that out separately so that we can vote on that as a separate item and create a discussion. So to ensure that these things happen, council needs to reject things that aren't adequate and don't have the level of detail. So by them constantly passing things that are unacceptable or devoid and lacking of detail and information that's important for the constituents, they are actually polishing this system to do the opposite.
Right.
So by saying no, that's not enough detail, in council, send things back, that is how you change it. There's not going to be a new motion that says we have to have detail in all our reports. No, you just reject reports that don't have the information that's required to make decisions.
Okay.
So further to that, stop supporting unthought out and poorly detailed plans or documents.
So if I'm understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, so you're saying that what's happening is that they're putting everything under one banner.
That's
So they're
one
saying,
element of it.
Save the puppies.
That's one element
And
of it.
And then at the bottom of Save the Puppies somewhere, there's little things tucked in there that need to be pulled out and detailed.
Sure. I'm
that make
speaking in
sense?
general overall terms.
Yeah.
Yeah. But let's just say, go back to a single report, let's say, or an item. If it lacked the information when it came to council and it gets passed, that's the problem.
Right. Right.
You can't blame the person who wrote the report at that point. You got to blame the people who stamped it and said, yeah, that's okay.
Right. We need more information.
So that creates a culture of, permitting non-factual or fact-lacking documents to slide through and become bylaw. That's the problem.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Thank you. Do you think that the CK Council requires more information from staff to make effective decisions? Like, is it an information issue?
In general, I can never tell you a time where less information is beneficial or where more information is not beneficial. So I like information, I like detail. Obviously, we're not going to expend millions of dollars getting information if it's not necessary, but I think in general, most of the issues are of a large enough scope or a significant enough dollar value that detail is warranted. Mm-hmm. So if I saw that lacking, that's a red flag to me.
Right. So that's when you go asking questions.
For sure.
Yeah.
Trust but verify.
Of the staff.
Trust but verify.
Agreed.
Right.
Okay, and then just to kind of finish off this question, let's say you're in a situation where there's conflict of interest. And,
sure.
And you feel like you're in a situation where you've got to put a vote out there and you have something that is personally at stake. How do you handle that situation?
Well, conflict of interest starts day one on the job. So for me, my intention is to work with the clerk, to work with integrity commissioner, whoever is involved, legal, whatever departments or heads are involved in determining where there might be a gray area or where things are black and white or what is or what isn't. Mm-hmm. I come from an industry, in the real estate industry, where full disclosure is essential, clear and concise. I mean, I'm already bound by the laws that are written to protect a client in that circumstance. So I cherish those and I value them. And I would be very open and transparent with the officials, so I have good feedback from them, as well as with any constituents who ask questions of me, so that we can have an open conversation prior to the conflict arising. But if a conflict comes up on the table, if there's whatever matter XYZ, it's really simple. Can't do that one. Sorry guys, pecuniary interest, way you go. I want to sleep at night. I don't want to go in and be part of the problem that I perceive is why I'm there to help.
Right. That's
It's
great.
completely counterproductive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Okay, so question number 2, or series of questions number 2. On March 7th, 2022, a staff recommendation to expand the facilities and programs at Hope Haven was put on hold to investigate a $1.2 million offer from a secret group of investors to move the shelter away from downtown. The new staff recommendation with the new investor option was presented as a done deal in the Chatham Daily News on Friday, March 18th, 2022, and passed by council and mayor on Monday, March 21st, 2022. Okay. Pretty quick. Would you have voted for the homeless shelter in a residential neighborhood, period? Not just this one, but in any residential neighborhood? And if so, why or why not?
On a surface level, without documentation, no specifics, I would tend to say I probably would not vote for that.
Okay.
I think before anyone jumped into that, the first thing I would like to be on the record for saying is I have an inherent problem with the title of homeless. And I feel that it's being used as a catch-all. And I think sometimes it's important to recognize that you can't deal with issues with catch-all phrases and generalizations and grouping large, complex groups of people into one and treating them all with that same medicine or whatever it might be.
Blanket statement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think when you look at what we call homelessness in CK, so I've heard people say, you know, there's at 4 a.m, I've got someone going through my shed, and you know, later that morning the person might be like sleeping on my lawn or something. And it happens over and over and over again, and then maybe you go talk to the local shelter and like, well, that person doesn't use our services, you know, blah, 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 blah. Talk to someone else and they say, yeah, they've been in and out of maybe an addiction program. You have to treat things like on a case-by-case basis in that situation, and tagging people as that's a homeless person, that's a homeless person, that's a homeless person. A, it's not fair to that person, and it's not fair to the specific groups and organizations that specialize in, let's say, mental health or addiction or you know, gender-based violence or whatever it may be, or just shelter in general.
Right.
I don't think it's fair to those people who have extensive training in their field, have boots on the ground, are dealing with the people affected by each one of those different afflictions. I don't think it's fair to them to suddenly come in and be like, oh, that's homelessness. I think you do them a huge disservice. And the problem I have overall is that it becomes a brand. And in the bureaucratic world, it becomes just a new budget item.
So now we go back to that, what we said in the previous question is now you're covering everything under one banner.
Absolutely.
Where you need to actually separate it and look at how do we deal with the drug addiction problem and or the mental illness problem or
So I think, like, for example, in this neighborhood, I'm very familiar with this neighborhood. I deal with a lot of human related issues, and one of them is extensive illicit drug use and the discarding of needles. You know, the Safe Streets Act specifically, 1999, specifically prohibits discarding a new or used hypodermic needle. It's a law of Canada, and it's a punishable offense and whatever. But these things are happening. So that's not a homeless person.
Right.
That's someone who discarded a needle. They don't need a title beyond that. That in itself, if I'm talking about a discarded needle, that is someone who discarded a needle. That's the only title that can be applied. Because otherwise we're going too far down the tracks. So if our problems are a result of people breaking in, those are thieves.
Right.
That's not a homeless person. That's not fair to someone who doesn't have a home to call them a thief. You can be both.
Yeah.
You can be a business owner and a thief. You can be a politician and a thief. You can be a municipal employee and a thief. Of course, all these things can intersect. But I think it's very important when we're dealing with homelessness to really drill down and go, okay, what are our core components of the actual people that are, you know, affecting an area or being grouped into this, you know, title.
That makes good sense.
Sorry to kind of take you on a
No, you probably answered
there,
my
but
future questions already. Okay, so I was going to ask why or why not, but that you're very clear on that. So going back to voting or not voting for the shelter.
Yeah.
What kind of information would you need? Because you said originally, actually, this goes back to something you said. You said you'd need more information. What kind of information would you need to make that type of decision to say, okay, I would put it in a neighborhood, into a residential neighborhood?
Good Lord. I mean, that would be a mountain of information. Offhand, real quick, first thing, I would want feedback from all of the departments that currently work with people that are homeless. With that comes an element of people who, for whatever reason, are unable to use the shelter service. And I think that's an important distinction to make too, is that I've spoken with some people that work in that area, and they say that, you know, unfortunately there's people that, because of maybe, for example, a mental health issue or an addiction issue, they actually are unable to function within that shelter and can't receive the service. Maybe they're putting a staff member at risk, or themselves at risk, or another shelter user at risk. So therefore, like, they basically become ineligible for shelter.
Right.
That's a different type of homelessness.
Right.
So that needs to be addressed. We need to really understand that, just as on even a high level as a citizen. Like, this is a very multifaceted issue. Here's what overall we think it looks like, and here's all the different elements and how we help deal with each individual, and then you're going to have to look at, okay, what does a perfect shelter look like? I don't know what that is. I don't have a level of experience with that. I think there probably is a standard that's probably worked in other communities that we could reflect on and say, okay, here's what's worked here. This is why their situation was unique. Here's what was similar. Here's what was dissimilar. Here's kind of a SWOT analysis of why this could work, why it may not work. Here's the challenges we'll have. So I'm going to need that.
Right.
I don't even know what that looks like, but I think it's going to be very comprehensive.
Well, when you see how people have succeeded and failed in the past.
Yeah, and then I do know that when people come from other communities, let's say, a gentleman has been homeless for 10 years in Toronto, and now he is homeless in Chatham. Whatever social services he's receiving, that comes to us the way the municipalities have been downloaded from the province. So, there's an inherent cost for new homeless that come.
Right.
So the challenge, like we've seen with our housing market, is we only have a limited supply of houses and a small market here. The same goes for our services. They are very small and fragile at best, I would think, from talking to a lot of people that work in them. So we need to, part of that SWOT analysis is what happens if we have an influx of double the next year?
Right.
How do we handle that? How do we talk about it?
What do we have in reserve?
We have to be able to talk about it. And it's a very distinct reality. I've heard stories that people are literally being dropped off. Like they're being trafficked here.
Yeah.
Like, it's horrible. It's heartbreaking to think that somebody's literally being moved and dropped off here. So there are so many edges to that feather that it's not fair to just call it a feather.
Yeah.
When each little edge has such a huge impact.
Yeah. What kind of services and support should be in place for homeowners when a homeless shelter moves into a neighborhood or community? It's a big question.
That's a big question. It's hard to answer because I don't know what it needs to look like, but I'll pretend I do. So I'll pretend I'm dealing with what we have now. So,
well, let's take it a step back. Let's say you have a house in this neighborhood. You know that this shelter's been put in place. What would you like done to protect not only your investment in your home, but also your family, your children?
Again, I have to go back to my original comment about that big generalization. And I think the challenge I have with this question is that due to a lot of our experience in Chatham with the current setup, is that I believe and I feel from my experience that there may be a group of individuals that aren't necessarily I don't know the word for someone that uses a shelter, that aren't
they call them stayers.
That isn't a stayer.
Yeah.
That is actually maybe a criminal recidivist, or someone that exhibits daily drug-seeking behaviors, or has extreme mental health problems and problems with authority, and is aggressive and confrontational. I don't know if that is necessarily what a stayer at a well-thought-out, well-functioning homeless shelter is. So I'm reluctant. I want to make sure I separate those two things.
That's a good point.
And I think it's really important, because I think someone who needs an extreme intervention with addiction or mental health that may be experiencing homelessness, and quite likely is as a result of those afflictions, I think they're actually in need of a totally different service. And I don't believe it looks like a shelter that operates out of someone's will and intention to be receive shelter.
I think that's a good point, and I think that,
this is the challenge here.
well, you've brought something to light too that should be addressed. It's not the stayers that are even necessarily the problem.
Not at
It's
all.
the people who are rejected or the people who don't fit the mold for that, but they're hanging out
Sure.
near the stayers who do.
Absolutely.
Or they're hanging out. That's so. What does the shelter bring into the neighborhood? I think you're right. I think we've got more incidents of criminal activity, more incidents of theft and robbery, and we've seen abuse, and we've seen all sorts of stuff going on, like domestic abuse, and we've seen all sorts of stuff happening since it started, right? So, I guess with that in mind, we're not protecting the people in the neighborhood from the shelter.
No.
We're protecting the people in the neighborhood from the results of the shelter.
Well, and that's
Does that
where,
make sense?
yeah, and I think for me that's what I find most interesting and intriguing, and I think there's a lot of discovery to be had there, because I think we need to look at Chatham-Kent has always had some of the highest property crime in Canada. That's a fact.
Yeah.
I mean, McLean's covered it 8 or 9 years ago. I think we were number 10 on the list.
Or I think we're number 1 for bike thieves.
I don't know what we are now, but it's high.
Yeah.
So I think if we suddenly see an uptick of any of these negative behaviors in an area, and if there is a correlation with something like, let's say, a homeless shelter, or I think that maybe is the wrong term, a ad hoc, quickly thrown together shelter,
Right.
then I think we need to study the correlation between that and what's going on there. Because again, I go back to the human element of like someone who needs shelter and is following the rules of the shelter, and that's a good case. They're working. It's working.
Mm-hmm.
That's success. But the person who can't get it together and is breaking into someone's house or assaulting. I saw a gentleman under the bridge downtown assault a woman. And they both would probably be tagged as homeless.
Right.
Well, I called the police. It's unacceptable. Like,
Yeah.
I don't care what title no one gets a pass. That's unacceptable behavior. That woman does not deserve to have that treatment, and she should not be cast off with a title. So, that goes back to those individual resources for people, and are we actively engaging? So the support for community, I guess, would say in this situation, when we have this heightened level of instances, there are all kinds of different ones. Vagrancy at 4 a.m, people sleeping on lawns, overdoses, discarded needles, property crime, threats and intimidation. Then the support for the community, regardless of whether there's shelter or not, is all the various services that would normally deal with individuals that are exhibiting those behaviors need to be brought in immediately,
Yep.
regardless of a shelter or not, because those can happen in any neighborhood.
Okay.
So I always want to separate the details and treat things on an individual thing. A crime per se is an individual case, and it needs to be treated individually. That's how it would be in the courtroom.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Where are we here? Would you require municipal staff to regularly make progress reports to council on the operation of the shelter and impact on the neighborhood? So on the operation of the shelter and on the impact of the neighborhood, would you require the municipal staff to have a progress report to council?
Absolutely. I think that would be part of any service that's provided to the public. So I think I would want to see that for policing as well. I think that's important, and I think there's a high level of success in that. I know in the past, dealing with downtown and the staff sergeant there, we had a very high level of success with the level of communication and reports that were given back to us about calls and where they were coming in and what they're related to. And then actively engaged with the police to do SEPTED audits, so it's crime prevention through environmental design, and where you look at lighting and alcoves and things that promote or create opportunity for crime. And so that's just one example of where that community engagement leads to success. So I think a report or feedback to the community on any given service is how you create a community-based conversation around that particular service, and you're guaranteed success when you do that.
Right on.
Because it takes a village, right? I mean, and that's what we've lost. We talked about a little bit earlier, the sense of community.
Yeah.
And that it's important, and I really have a hard time, again, with this label like homelessness. When we cast that label on anyone, and especially someone who needs help with addiction, that's so unfair to them, or mental health. Because that is the least of their problems. They live in a nightmare world in their own mind in many cases, or they're using the world's most powerful drugs we've ever seen and are completely hijacked by them.
Well, we've all seen them in Chatham.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's essential to separate that.
Yeah. Good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah.
In terms of transparency, what will you do as a councillor to ensure that CK residents can clearly see what the municipality is planning to do and how council, mayor, and municipal staff will go ahead delivering on those plans? So for example, would you pass a staff recommendation without names of investors being public? Would you let private investors unduly influence public policy? That kind of thing.
It's a very loaded question. I'm sorry. I just...
Yeah, I'm smashing you with real detailed questions.
There's a couple questions in there. Give me the first question again.
Okay, so
without the lead at the end.
So let me see if I can just kind of
distill it a little bit.
Distill this a little bit. That is a loaded question. So is this question asking how far you'd go? In terms of transparency.
Some of that I think you've already really.
Yeah, like you've smashed into. I feel like it's almost.
So you could probably just jump ahead a little bit here.
Yeah. Okay. So now homelessness in Chatham-Kent, and for lack of a better word, I know that the phrase homelessness for you is a loaded word. It's not unique to Chatham-Kent. Communities across the country are struggling with the problems that lead to homelessness and finding the support services and resources necessary to help people. Right? Like we know this. What do you think the leading causes of homelessness in Chatham-Kent are? Now, so for purposes of our conversation, because of how we started and my understanding of how you feel about the word itself.
Yeah, that's fine.
But I would say we'd want to encompass a lot of the people that we're dealing with.
Yeah,
so if it's if it's mental issues, drug addiction, all that stuff.
I think for sure, homelessness, is a function of, first it's a finance function, right? So it's a personal budgeting problem, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. I mean it that the expense is greater than the revenue for the person.
Yep.
So, and especially now with the cost of housing and the availability of housing, with most houses being snapped up by investors for profit, that's only increased the cost side. So, if someone's struggling with mental health or addiction, the likelihood that they are going to be able to pay rent in our current economy, they would be homeless. So the leading factor, I believe, probably would be addiction and mental health related issues. I think are probably the number one way you can really kick someone's feet out and put them on their knees.
Yep.
Is to not be able to receive proper services for addiction and mental health. Absolutely. I mean, how can you possibly confront the daily challenges that any homeowner or apartment renter or whatever it may be deals with when you're struggling with those things?
Well, with all you're thinking about is the next hit, right?
Yeah.
That's a challenge. You get elected, and everything goes as you're planning. What's your first step with in terms of this whole issue? Like how do you look at that? Obviously you've put a lot of thought into this. So what's your first step? What do you do with this issue in Chatham-Kent?
We need to have more conversation. I don't know enough about it, and I don't think there's been enough conversation. I mean, constructive conversation, not where we're all fighting to say, hey, this is what it is and this is what it isn't. It's like, what is it?
Yeah.
Why have we seen large numbers of youth? And I've seen people that are maybe 17, 18 years old where they're clearly completely overtaken by addiction on the street. That's alarming. It's terrifying. So what is the cause of that? And I mean, these are complex issues. And we're talking about municipal governance. We're getting into provincial and federal policy failures or shortcomings. So for us to be able to think that we're going to solve it by ourselves, we got to tread cautiously. Like, we got to do our best. But I think from the municipal level, the grassroots level, it starts with conversation. So awareness and understanding and education.
Okay.
And however we can influence our youth so that they can understand it, because they're currently, the way the trend looks, they're most likely to experience it next.
Yeah.
I don't have stats on that, but I see an alarming number of young people that appear to be afflicted. So I think it starts conversation. And so whatever we can do to increase the engagement, increase the conversation, that's going to be our recipe for success. And we're not going to get along. We're not going to see eye to eye. There's going to be very heated and passionate conversation, and people are going to be very upset because this stuff is upsetting. You know, we have individuals in Chatham who have family members who are on the streets.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's fair to just say that's why they're there and that's why they're not there. The fact is they're there.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be an easy road home, but the more we don't talk about it, the worse it's going to get.
That's great. Thank you. I've got one more for you.
Okay.
This is an issue that's near and dear to our heart, and that's why we're doing these.
Yeah, I understand.
But you're running for city council, and you're doing that. You're doing that because you want to do that, and so this is your opportunity to speak to why you're doing it, and you know, just generally, you know, a couple minutes, 30 seconds, whatever you feel like saying, anything you want to say about your
and so on a real high level, I feel that, you know, the municipality has a budget of $363 million for 2022. So that's expenditure. That's a big company. We've got, I believe, over 1,400 employees. This is a big machine. And council's job is to fulfill the role of council, number one. It's laid out in the provincial statute. So, to the letter of the law, if I come in as a councillor, I want to fulfill those duties and make sure that whatever I'm doing and whatever it looks like matches that statement. And essentially, if I can come in and I can help bring more transparency, more engagement, get more conversation, advocacy, whatever it might be, information finding, then I'm going to be fulfilling my role. That's what we're paid for, is to kind of bridge the gap and to make sure that that machine is running in its best interest and in the public's best interest, with council sitting on top.
Awesome.
That's it.
Thank you very much for
You're
your time,
welcome.
Chris.
Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate
Appreciate it.
coming
Thanks,
down.
Dan.
All right. Appreciate you.
Yeah.